The death toll in Iran's crackdown escalates, and President Trump says an armada of ships is on the way. I'm Ben Mulroney. The West Block starts right now.
Mr. President.
When it comes to President Trump, it was a whiplash kind of week. He is now sending ships to Iran, and we'll get Ambassador John Bolton's thoughts in 2 minutes. And is all of this Greenland talk playing into President Putin's hands? We speak with a Canadian NATO expert in Denmark. Also ahead on the show, it was a speech heard around the world. But what is Washington's reaction to Prime Minister Mark Carney's Davos address? The U.S. editor of the Financial Times joins us later in the show. President Donald Trump's ambitions, grievances, and feuds were on full display last week at the World Economic Forum. From targeting Prime Minister Mark Carney, continuing his push for Greenland, and doubting the relevance of NATO, Trump riled a global audience. And when it comes to the violent and deadly nationwide unrest in Iran, the president said American ships are en route. We'll dig into all of those topics on the show, starting with reaction from one of his closest advisors turned harshest critics. Joining us now is Ambassador John Bolton. Thank you so much for your time today, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with Iran. The death toll in the protest crackdown is now at least 5,000. President Trump says Washington is watching Iran closely and that he has an armada of ships heading in that direction. What do you think this is leading to as far as U.S. intervention?
Well, I don't think Trump has made a final decision. He rarely does until the absolute last minute. The fact is, though, he did draw a red line while the demonstrations were still underway. He urged the protesters to continue to protest. He threatened Iran if they interfered or abused the protesters. And he said, help is on the way. Well, they did continue to kill the protesters, and so far, no help has arrived. The protests and the killing stopped because the opposition just decided it was unsafe to go outside, not because of anything we or anybody else said. So I think this is a consequential decision, both for Trump's credibility, but also because I think there's a chance here to destabilize the regime further and help the morale of the opposition, if nothing else. I think the regime is very weak, and I think we ought to take that into account.
Well, he posted on social a few weeks ago that the U.S. is, quote, locked and loaded when it comes to Iran. Post-Venezuelan takeover, does that have new meaning?
Well, with Trump, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But I think if you look back in the circumstances of when the demonstrators were out in the street, I think they could reasonably conclude, as you say, from the example of what happened in Caracas, that Trump was serious about it. I mean, the words of the president do have consequences. Even if he doesn't appreciate it, doesn't understand it, people listen to him and react.
Well, Trump is now threatening to deport Iranians from the U.S., sending them back to Iran during all of this. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, it would be crazy to do something like that. I mean, I'm not saying every recent arrival from Iran is a regime opponent, but the vast majority of them are. It's like sending refugees from Venezuela back to Caracas to face what's left of the Maduro regime. I mean, this is an example, I think, of how the expulsion program for aliens who have come into the country illegally is just kind of out of control. It just is not tuned to American national interest. It's just a reflex action at this point.
Well, you worked closely with the president during his first term in office. How are you seeing him act differently this term?
Well, for most of the first year of this term, I said, and I believe that what we were really seeing in public was what we had seen in private in the first term. In other words, Trump had gotten to the point where he just acted as he normally did. But I think the pace of the delusions that he's been spinning has increased. Trump often just makes facts up of the world as he would like it to be. I think this board of peace idea that he has spun up is a good example of that. This board of peace isn't going to do anything in Gaza until Hamas disarms and the Gaza Strip is demilitarized, let alone roam around the world. I think it's something that he's spinning out of whole cloth, and I think we see more and more of that. I think that's a problem.
A problem for the U.S. and or the world?
Well, everybody, because if it looks like the president is detached from reality, and I think the example of Greenland was a pretty good example of that, where there was a road to accomplish, and still is, exactly what the U.S. needs for its security. Really, all the NATO members in the Arctic, Canada, the U.S., Norway as well, and all the entire NATO membership need greater security given the Russian and Chinese efforts as the polar ice cap recedes. But to talk about the use of military force or tariffs against our friends and allies really just takes this into a parallel world. And I think opposition in the U.S., domestic opposition, would have been incredible had Trump used military force. You would think somebody in the White House would have told him that before.
Well, and having spent time with him, especially in private, what impact did the stock market reaction to him possibly using troops on the ground in Greenland do to his decision? Because the stock market went down, and then he said, no, I'm not going to use force. It went back up.
Yeah, look, I think it was a factor. I don't think there's any question about it. I don't think it was necessarily the determining factor. I think in Europe, as I read the reaction there, they believe that it was the strong, unified reaction in Europe that caused Trump to turn around. I think that's a mistake. I didn't read the European reaction as strong and unified. I give great credit to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. I don't know how he did it, and I wouldn't necessarily think he's going to be able to do it again. With all due respect to him, he's tried hard in the first year, but we have avoided this crisis. But we need to address the harm this is doing to the NATO alliance, and how we can mitigate that and get ready for the point, which may seem like it's a long way away, but the point where Trump's no longer president and we can repair the damage.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Is the damage that Donald Trump has done in this 1 year repairable?
Yeah, yes, I think it is. I don't discount that more damage is coming. But I think it's a mistake to conclude too much from inadequate information. NATO's had problems throughout its existence. That this is a particular problem when the leader of the major power in the alliance doesn't seem to understand its value to his own country. I acknowledge that, but I don't think other member nations should draw apocalyptical conclusions from where we are now. There are things we can do. We can work together on the problem of the ghost fleets, the ships, the tankers, and others that carry products from the likes of Venezuela, Iran, Russia, in violation of our sanctions, just as one example. When I was in college, I read a book by a then pretty unknown Harvard professor named Henry Kissinger, published in the early 1960s. The book was called NATO, the Troubled Alliance. And somehow we made it past the early 1960s. We'll make it past this too if we just keep the ultimate objective in mind.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Donald Trump's ambitions could also have lasting effects on NATO.
So what we have gotten out of NATO is nothing except to protect Europe from the Soviet Union and now Russia. I mean, we've helped them for so many years. We've never gotten anything. They'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines.
Contact from the north.
Canadian troops, who lost 158 members in Afghanistan, would wholeheartedly disagree. Joining us now from Denmark is Dr. Jean-François Bélanger, a Canadian who's at the Royal Danish Defence College and a research fellow at the NATO Defence College. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, President Trump has said NATO has done nothing for the U.S., although our Canadian troops who served in Afghanistan would say otherwise. What was your reaction when you heard the president say that?
Unpleasant, but not surprising, I think would be the response. It's an ongoing disdain and distrust for the organization, for the president, which we've seen this surrounding the Greenland events that we have recently. We had that during his first term. It's just an ongoing pattern.
Yeah, and it seems like nobody can convince him that the ideas that he has in his head are not necessarily rooted in fact.
If we go back to the first administration, he had individuals that were cognizant of NATO and had worked within NATO, right? James Mattis had been Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, for example, for a couple of years. So there was an important part of his administration that were familiar and close to NATO. But with the second administration, while we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio has historically been supportive of NATO, the Secretary of Defense is not, and many in his inner circle aren't either, which makes it difficult. And I think he's mentioned it a few times, but the law that Congress passed that the president could not unilaterally lead the organization is something that he's not particularly happy with.
Now, how have some other NATO countries reacted?
Most of the allies will continue to reinforce the importance of the alliance for collective security, transatlantic security. We've seen it, for example, with the Prime Minister of Denmark speech right after Davos, reaffirming commitment to NATO, reaffirming the importance of the United States within NATO, and so on. But there's also this not fringe, but this aspect of the organization that is represented now by the Secretary General, who is saying that the president actually was a benefit, in a sense, to the alliance because he, through his rhetoric, through action, he forced the allies to go towards a 5% of defense, and forced the European allies to increase their defense. Which is he's not unique and alone in thinking this, but it's yes, it's an interesting. But overall, for most of the allies, most of which rely on the alliance for their regional and their territorial defense, it is very important that they'll reaffirm their commitment to it.
Well, and I think what's lost in this is the historical genesis of NATO. It was invented to buttress against an imperialist USSR. Now, there was a moment when the USSR collapsed that you might have been able to make a better argument for not needing NATO, but Russia is ascendant, Russia is imperialist, and therefore the need for NATO still exists. And that case, I don't believe, has necessarily been made to Washington, or maybe they just don't want to hear it.
At its formation, it was clear it was the containment of the Soviet Union and also protection of Europe. It was also in large part the installment of the nuclear umbrella and so on. And at the moment, while Russia is understood as being the enemy, you have one of the militarily and monetarily one of the most important member of the alliance, who is actually pushing back against that notion that Russia is the adversary, especially in Europe. Although I think the Greenland situation was an interesting moment where we've had, around the Ukraine conflict, we had President Trump who was downplaying the threat of the Russian, inviting them in, essentially making their seat at the table and so on. However, the whole Greenland justification was surrounding Russian possible aggression. It's in a way an untenable position.
Well, we've got to talk about this new suggestion by the president of invoking NATO's Article 5, the attack on one is an attack on all, to get NATO to help with the U.S. border, and that it would put the NATO relationship to the test. What's your reaction to that?
That it's going to be problematic at best. If it's a purely domestic issue, which is immigration for the United States, it technically would not go within the NATO charter. However, since it's coming from the United States and a very critical president, my suspicion is that the North Atlantic Council would, one or another, be forced to discuss the issue, and probably that the allies would ask it because they don't want to antagonize the president further, but you can also imagine the kind of discussion this is going to bring, because the United States will then have to prove that there's an actual threat to their security that would fit within NATO. And then the choice becomes either the NAC rejects it and we move on with the consequences that it might have and so on afterwards, or in something that in my mind would be unprecedented in a way, they would agree to it, and then you would have some allies, one or another, send troops to the United States, which is in a way kind of unthinkable to deal with immigration as a domestic issue. But to kind of sum up, if he was to make the formal demand for Article 5, at absolute best, it puts the ally in a very difficult position.
Well, it can sometimes be hard to follow the orange bouncing ball out of Washington, but you've helped us get a little clarity today, and we'll, of course, be following the story. Thank you for your time, Doctor.
Anytime.
Coming up, how the Carney-Trump tit-for-tat is being regarded in Washington.